The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight on The Agenda.
I think everyone is doing trade missions, and it's a cliche in Hollywood to say, oh yeah, you're great, you're wonderful, and you're amazing, let's do lunch and let's keep talking. I think just as Hollywood North emerged, we took jobs away from Hollywood. I think it would be naive to think that if there's a cheaper deal internationally, that Hollywood North would be protected in some way.
After film and television productions in Ontario finally dropped their pandemic testing protocols, they were hit with another setback. When writers and actors went on strike in the U.S. last summer, many American productions that film in Ontario were forced to shut down. And some in the industry say things have not rebounded as quickly as they had hoped. What can be done to help the industry bounce back? And how can Ontario meet the highly ambitious economic goals that Premier Doug Ford has laid out for media production? Let's ask. In Grand Canyon National Park, Arizona, via Skype, Marguerite Pigott, Film Commissioner and Director of Entertainment Industries for the City of Toronto. In Sudbury, Ontario, via Skype, Devon Mahesh. Devon is Director of Industry Development and Production Services at Cultural Industries Ontario North. And here in our studio, Carla Trujillo Villon, a film and television production coordinator and member of IATSE 411 and the Directors Guild of Canada, and Rod Butler, Vice President, Content and Regulatory at the Canada Media Fund. Good to have you two here in our studio, and to our friends in Points Beyond, thanks for joining us on TVO tonight. I want to start by having our director, Sheldon Osmond, bring up some numbers here that really tell a very big story. This is the economic impact of film and television in the province of Ontario. And if we go back to 2021, right in the thick of COVID, we were still doing almost $3 billion of business here in the province. The following year, it actually went up a bit to $3.2 billion. But then came the strike, 2023, and business really fell, $1.8 billion annually. That is a big drop-off, and Marguerite, perhaps we could have you start by telling us, those are the numbers, but what does it look like on the ground when you see that kind of drop?
Those numbers are really real. It definitely, what we're seeing is that coming out of the strike, less production is being commissioned. So there's definitely a downturn. We're feeling that in terms of fewer productions in Toronto. Scouting, which has been robust at the beginning of the year, is beginning to plateau a little bit. We are expecting a reasonably strong 2024, but it's definitely taking a while to get started. But we know that the pipeline is strong. We know it will come back. It's just taking time. And that's really challenging, given that we've been through COVID and, of course, the strikes.
We'll, of course, talk about that pipeline during our discussion here. Carla, what was the strike like for you and your colleagues?
Painful. It was really painful.
How so?
Not a lot of us were working, and the few of us that weren't, we were working below our regular pay grade. We were accepting any job that we could get.
Meaning what?
So if I was a production coordinator, if somebody offered me an assistant production coordinator position, I would take it, because that was the only game in town.
Even though under normal circumstances, that's not what you would aspire to?
That's not normally what I would do. I've done it, but I haven't done it in a while.
Gotcha. Devon, give us a sense of what the strike was like in Northern Ontario and the impact it had there.
Sure. We, by the hard numbers, we were down about 60%. We had 40 productions going down to 16. It was an interesting time because we have a lot more Canadian independent production happening in Northern Ontario. So we were able to avoid some of the, let's say, American shows that weren't coming anymore. We didn't have them anyways. So there was a little bit of a success in that. But coming out of it, it wasn't a fast return the way we had with COVID. It was almost like projects were stockpiled after COVID and we could jump into a bunch of new productions. But more recently, it's been, after the strike, a lot of, feels like kicking tires or browsing on projects and not really a lot of things landing the way that they were. So we're feeling it. There's hopefulness, as Marguerite alluded to, where we think a lot more projects are going to be looking for the rest of the year, but they haven't actually formally committed yet to being here. So that's where we have some concerns.
Rod, I wonder with U.S. productions on pause because of the strike, whether the domestic industry here in Canada filled the bill at all.
I think the domestic side filled the bill in the sense of the talent is here. The writers, directors, producers, creators, we have a strong system here. I think where it gets challenging is there's no more money in Canada just because the US studios are on pause. And I think to Marguerite's point, it raises a little bit more of an issue in the sense of there is a strike and there will be a bounce back. But I think with other macro forces at play, there may not be a bounce back that takes the same shape as we're coming out of peak TV. Everyone with a Twitter account that was making a joke could get a development deal a few years ago. I think the commissioning and the licensing has started to change. I think the online streamers and the platforms that drove peak TV had a model of growth, where as long as they kept growing their subscriber base, it's Wall Street that would value them in a very different, high way. Now they're being scrutinized to say, have you made profit? So with profit comes ways to cut costs, like maybe changing the production schedule and shortening it, or as we are well-versed, offshoring jobs. I think in Variety in March, they said that of the billions that Netflix is going to spend in the coming years, more than half is outside of North America. So I think change is coming. I think there will be a bounce back, but it may not look the same as the past.
Carla, did you expect that after the strike ended, that things would bounce back very quickly?
Yeah, we expected the same bounce back that we had after COVID, after they lifted the restrictions, and there was a stock, as Marguerite was saying, there was a stockpile of productions.
And did that happen?
It has not happened yet.
It has not happened.
No, there's been a lot of rumors, but I mean, it's just talk at this point.
Marguerite, why would things not have bounced back as quickly?
Well, I think Rod really gave some good reasons. I think there was peak TV. There was a lot of spending going on television. It was rising and rising. It was rising in a way that was pretty difficult to sustain. I think many people expected a plateau, potentially an eventual contraction. Add to that inflationary pressures, and add to that the fact that every business in some shape or form was affected by the strikes, and you have a bit of a perfect storm that is causing the studios and streamers to really look at the bottom line, really sharpen their pencils. As Rod said, not looking so much at subscriber growth, but looking at revenue per member, which is a very different metric. Within this very challenging environment, there are reasons to be very bullish on Toronto in particular, on Ontario in particular. And I know we'll get into that down the line.
Well, let's get into it now. Go ahead, follow up if you would, because everybody knows about the American-Canadian dollar advantage that Americans doing productions in Canada enjoy. What else is in that pipeline that makes Toronto such a good place to do business?
Well, thank you for asking. What we're seeing is that the reason why I'm in Grand Canyon National Park today is because I'm on my way home from Los Angeles, where we just did the mayor's mission to Los Angeles. So the City of Toronto Film Office took 40 local industry leaders down to LA. These are union leaders, soundstage owners and operators, post-production VFX, and we met with every studio, streamer, all the majors, independents. We did over 30 meetings in LA over the course of about a day and a half with the mayor and the budget chief and the chair of the film board. And what we kept hearing from everyone is that they love Toronto. They love shooting here. As Rod and Devin both said, as Carla demonstrates, we have the talent here. It's well established. It's a very mature production jurisdiction. So we have very sophisticated soundstage spaces. We have very sophisticated post-production and VFX, award-winning year after year after year, and that's very well established. But on top of that, of course, we have the tax credits, both provincially and federally, both for production and for post-production and VFX. And those tax credits are an absolutely critical part of our value proposition, as is the currency differential. So what we're hearing from all of the studios and majors, and we were meeting with heads of production, we were meeting with the decision makers who decide where productions worth tens or hundreds of millions of dollars go. They all say Toronto is a top consideration for them for all of those reasons. So as more and more cities and provinces and countries compete for this business, Toronto is definitely in pole position. And I think we can take a lot of comfort from that.
Devin, let me get you to make the same case for Northern Ontario, which has seen, until recently, quite an uptick in production there as well.
Absolutely. I think what we can rely on is, as Marguerite mentioned, the tax credits, but also we have a fund specialized in Northern Ontario that helps attract productions as well. That's from the NOHFC. And that program really drives a lot of the decision making for producers to choose here as a destination. And then also leads to a variety of job creation. I think that's the part where we're most concerned or most excited about the potential for American productions coming. And even if they come to Toronto, it kind of boosts up our job growth as well, because we're getting people that were trained here working on projects where they're learning or expanding their skill set and then coming back with increased talent. And then that helps to attract more productions to Northern Ontario as well, because we see, like a show like Shoresy that's filmed here in Sudbury, that show is, competing around the world for distribution. It's really a top level creation as far as the country goes. That type of show is where we need to see more happening for us to grow as a region. We need, maybe 3 of those types of shows or 4, and then that'll be where we see the growth in multiple cities.
Rod, let me give you a chance to contradict Marguerite if you want to. Sure. And that is, I want to put this on. Lots of jurisdictions are doing lots of trips to Los Angeles. Yes. They've got these trade missions going on all the time because everybody wants the business and everybody's offering subsidies to get it done, if I can steal an expression from the Premier. What makes you think that our trade missions to Los Angeles are any more effective than anybody else's?
There's nothing that makes me think that they're more effective. I think everyone is doing trade missions, and it's a cliche in Hollywood to say, oh yeah, you're great, you're wonderful, and you're amazing. Let's do lunch and let's keep talking. I think just as Hollywood North emerged, we took jobs away from Hollywood. I think it would be naive to think that if there's a cheaper deal internationally, that Hollywood North would be protected in some way. I think the way that we mitigate against let's say there are peaks, sometimes there's boom times, but in the bust times, I think we need to invest, as Devin said, in Canadian content and culture. I think if we invest in the creators and the amazing writers and storytellers here, it's not going to ever supplant the service production dollars that come into the province and into the country. But when you're talking about controlling at least the future and not the whims of Hollywood or Silicon Valley, I think there's something to be said for, let's invest in ourselves, let's nurture and kind of plant seeds across the aisle and make sure that our domestic production and our IP in Canada is healthy. I think as we're starting to think about the next few years, we're not even talking about the monster at the door, which is AI. I think that's going to also radically change things. I think the viewing patterns of someone like my mom in their 70s who's watching movies of the week on cable, on a cable bundle.
And better be watching this show right now.
And is watching Tonight at 8, exactly. Good. And so, no, exactly. But I think we have a generation that's watching content on their phone. So there's going to be a bounce back. There will be a bounce back. There will be a healthier service production side. But I think we have to start on a macro level, preparing for making sure our domestic supports and pillars are established.
You just heard Rod say maybe some of that effort would be better spent on the domestic industry as well. Do you think there is tremendous value in these trade missions to California?
So I don't think that Rod and I are disagreeing at all. I think we're agreeing with each other in new ways. So I think it's not so much that the mission needs to be competitively superior to other missions. Ours is very effective in that we bring down unions and employers together. We bring down the whole industry with us, which others do not. And because we do that, LA sees that we work together. And so when they see that, they know that we can take on bigger projects than jurisdictions where that is less of a defining feature. So that's just a note on the mission. Also, I think, it's not that the mission needs to be competitive, it's that Ontario needs to be and Toronto needs to be. I think for all the reasons that we've listed, the sophisticated sound stages, talent, post-production VFX, tax credit, We are. And that's reflected back to us time and again, not just in what people say, but in the choices they make. With regard to domestic production, I couldn't agree more. It's really important for Canada to have a voice, for Ontario to have a voice, for our amazing talent to be celebrated. And we did a breakfast with independent filmmakers who do lower budget stuff in Los Angeles, because we didn't want to leave anybody off of our list. And one of the points I made to them is, don't look at us just as a place to put your productions. Look at us as a creative engine. Look at us as a source. Look at our amazing filmmakers. Look at Sarah Polley. Look at David Cronenberg. Look at Nimisha Mukherjee. Look at all of this talent. These people are, many of them, are writers as well, the Don McKellars of the world, the Clement Virgos. Look at our novelists. Look at Miriam Taves. Look at Margaret Atwood. Look at Sheila Heti. So the argument for production in Toronto, in Ontario, and in Canada is dimensional. The need for support is dimensional. It just takes different forms, whether you're talking about domestic or international.
Devin, I'm not trying to make trouble here. Well, maybe just a little bit, but let me let me ask you whether you sometimes think the focus by offices such as Marguerite's are so focused on trying to get the Americans to come up here that there is a lesser priority put on domestic production. What do you think?
I don't think those things are exclusive. When you attract the foreign production, it's not at the expense of domestic. Well, it doesn't have to be. And I don't think that's the vibe I ever got off of Toronto, is where we're not creating opportunities for independent Canadians. It's always been a place where people would move from other parts of the country to come and do things in Toronto, right? And I think that's still the case. So in our part region, Northern Ontario, we're benefiting from these missions that come to Toronto. There are going to be shows that take place in rural areas. There's going to be shows that require, more months of snow. So they find locations that end up benefiting us. They bring a movie that'll come here that we wouldn't really have access to otherwise. It's a meeting that happened in LA during a mission like this, where, the conversation started, and then, maybe someone at Ontario Creates is like, oh yeah, there's a perfect spot outside of North Bay that'll fit that movie perfectly. And then we end up attracting it and having the resources that can fulfill that. And I think, to the point of having 40 people in various parts of the industry visit another city, I think that cohesion and showing that is really what we try and do in Northern Ontario as well. When we go to Toronto, or when we go to TIFF, or when we go to one of the American showcases, we're able to demonstrate that things can get done here. And I think on the scale where you're looking at maybe, $100 million movie or a series that are reaching 200 million, like those types of projects only have a limited amount of space in the world that they can fit into. And to have that here, I think attracts certain technology investments, certain infrastructure investments, and other things that benefit the entire province once it's all said and done.
Rod, you tell me if I'm wrong. I did infer from your comments that you think there is more of an influence, or an emphasis rather, on trying to get the big deal in California at the expense of the local industry.
I think we need to have both. But I think in terms of our long range, protecting our vision, we both need industrial autonomy and cultural. And I think if we start to think about CanCon, and people cringe when they think of, oh, it's poorly lit, or it's not the same as the US studios. I think Canada has to do a better job of exporting itself and its brand. And I think if we start to invest, again, we need the US dollars. We need the foreign investment here too. It's not necessarily a fixed sum game. However, I think on a macro level, we need to start to reinvigorate and relook at how we're investing in Canadian content, where again, the production and the IP is owned in Canada and exploited by Canadians. I think when we're talking about the next 20 years, we cannot be this walled garden anymore. We have to look to promotion, not protection.
Well, to that end, I remember attending this press conference back in January. Amazon MGM Studios made a big announcement with Pinewood Studios. And the Premier was there, the Culture Minister was there, the Mayor of Toronto was there, lots of VIPs from the business were there. And here is a little snippet from that press conference. Sheldon, if you would.
Today's announcement is going to expand the company's footprint even further. Amazon MGM Studios' commitment to lease 160,000 square feet of space at this world-class facility right here in the Portlands is going to boost film and TV production and help ensure that the industry will continue to grow and flourish for years to come.
Now, Carla, I'm willing to bet you didn't vote for him, but having said that, what do you think of that announcement?
I think that's great, but I've heard that. I've heard rumors about that for years. So if it happens, great.
You're not
but
sure?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I would until I see it.
You're from Missouri on this one. Show me.
Kinda, yeah.
Okay. Marguerite, let me put it this way. The Premier has also said that he wants this industry in this province to be a $5 billion annual industry. And as we know, from 2023, they're at $1.8 billion now. We're a million miles away from that goal. So tell me, is that a realistic goal to set?
I think it's a very ambitious goal, and I welcome ambition. With ambition, there needs to be strategy. With ambition, there needs to be support to help us all get there. The Premier wisely did not distinguish whether that industry is international or domestic. As we're all agreeing with one another, it needs to be both. And each side needs different types of supports. So I think we'll work together, and we will get as close as we can to the Premier's goal, if not surpass it.
Rob, he's talking about more than doubling the size of the current amount of business done here. Is that doable?
Doable, I don't know. I love the ambition, as Marguerite said. I think it's great to have high goals. But again, we keep coming back to, I think if we let outside forces that have a history of being extractive define where we're going to go, I think we have to chart our own course. So yes, we will work in complement and we will work with these new players. But I think in terms of the long-range plan, we have to set our own course. And I think $5 billion, sometimes people like to politic, and I think that's a great number. Time will tell if he can reach that.
For sure. Devin, what do you think the odds are on getting to a $5 billion business here in the province?
I'm confident we will eventually get there. In terms of what needs to happen for, if you look at a place like Los Angeles, they're doing $29 billion US. So, that's not a huge, when you look at what 5 would be Canadian out of that, like that's not a huge take from the international world of production. So if we look at America, we look at Europe, we look at Asia, and some of those productions then coming to Toronto or Canada, or Ontario rather, on whole, like that seems like a nice fit. And if you look at, just from our practical growth, more than doubling is our goal. We have to get infrastructure around studio builds and attract some top-tier television, and then that would help us be able to do it. But that would contribute to the Ontario bottom line. Like I could see that happening. And you look at, where we are and some other parts of the province, you can see where year-round production isn't really happening yet. So if you had studio infrastructure where, the weather wasn't affecting the quality of the output, you would have more talent development. I can see all of that happening and driving us up towards $5 billion. If it lands at 4.2, not 5, maybe that's the right number. I don't have the insight to really know what the max capacity of our province is, but I think that there's a lot of room to grow. And you also see an interest in, especially young people, because we tour the colleges and universities quite a bit, and we see an interest in both film, television, gaming is another space where new jobs are coming up and people want to work in that space. So visual effects is an area where I think that Ontario can grow as a province. Maybe we invest more in that type of infrastructure, and we see some growth that way. Maybe there's some new jobs that can be created around environmental considerations. I know that that's like an entirely new factor that's creating job growth and interest, and people who are very keen on getting environmentally sustainable productions going. That maybe that's a whole other set of jobs or ways that we can create in the industry. Maybe there's some investments that will help us be a leader in that space. So maybe $5 billion of dollars that might not happen, but maybe there's some other leadership within the industry that we can be doing as Ontario.
Gotcha. With just a few minutes to go here, let me circle back to something Marguerite raised earlier in our discussion and see where we go on that. Anybody who watches a movie and watches to the end will notice how many different jurisdictions around the world offer tax credits and subsidies in order to get production happening in their jurisdiction. And those credits can go on for a long time. And we're up there too. And I guess, okay, Marguerite, start off on this. We are big players in the subsidies and tax credit pool. Are they doing the job? Are they doing the trick? Because everybody's offering them right now, and what makes ours any better than anybody else's?
So thanks for that. When we were down in LA, we met with a lot of people who are in roles like vice president of incentives, vice president of finance, et cetera, things like that. People who could actually open up to us and show us cross sections of how our tax credits compare across jurisdictions, not just in terms of the numbers, but in terms of how they actually hit the bottom lines of projects, which is a very nuanced and challenging thing. And what we see is that our tax credits are highly competitive. The people that we were speaking to, of course, always want more. They want us to do tax credits for above the line talent, which is actors, directors, producers who are not necessarily Canadian, and so on. There are always requests for more, but the fact of the matter is our tax credits are competitive. And the reason why Ontario is competitive and Toronto is competitive is because it's not just about the tax credits. The industry has been burned by jurisdictions that decide there's gold in them, their hills, and they want to get into film and television. And so they, create a wildly generous incentive, and then it doesn't pay out. And people get really burned. So they value the stability of the tax credits here. They value the maturity and the substance of our talent, which is built equally by international and domestic production. They value the infrastructure. We have 2.5 million square feet of studio space with another 750,000 being built. So that's what they value. Tax credits are part of an overall value proposition that is extremely persuasive to them.
Carla, how about you? Are they as generous as they need to be to get our share of the pie?
The tax credits?
Yeah.
Yeah. They are.
We play well in that field.
We play well in that field. Yeah. The fact that they want, yes, they always want, as Marguerite said, yes, they always want more, but I think we've given them more than their fair share.
Rod, what do you say?
I think what Marguerite said is right. It's tax credits are competitive. I think there's always going to be a race to the bottom of there's someone else that can have a better deal. But I think it's our infrastructure, our talent. I'm reminded the biggest service production in Canada last year or ever was The Last of Us, an HBO show based on a video game, filmed in Alberta for the first season, then picked up and moved to Vancouver in BC. So province to province, year to year, stuff can change. So I think the tax credit stuff is great. We need to make sure the incentives and the levers are all there. But I think we have to, in terms of promoting ourselves, talk about, again, who we have in terms of talent and a deep bench.
Gotcha. That's our time, everybody. I want to thank all four of you for joining us on TVO tonight and shining the spotlight, if I can use that metaphor, on part of our economy that is hugely important. Okay, let's say thanks to Marguerite Pigott, the Film Commissioner and Director of Entertainment Industries for the City of Toronto. Devin Mahesh, Director, Industry Development and Production Services at Cultural Industries Ontario North. He joined us from Sudbury. Carla Trujillo-Villon, IATSE 411, Directors Guild of Canada, and Rod Butler, Vice President, Content and Regulatory at the Canada Media Fund.
Hi, I'm Kate Drummond. I'm an actor, writer, director, former school teacher. As an actor, what I do is I'll wear something called a motion capture suit, which is very similar to how they shot Avatar. So fully black suit with sensors all over, a head-mounted camera, not all that comfortable, but they're getting better. And basically what happens is everything I do as an actor with my body, with my voice, with my face will get transferred in real time onto an animation that may or may not look like me. TV and film is very subtle. and it's very internal. And when you watch TV and film, you see sometimes a lot of things happening without the actor doing anything, supposedly. They're doing a lot on the inside, a lot of thinking, a lot of feeling, decision making, they're being curious. And it's very small and contained. Video game acting is more like stage, in that you've got to really sort of present the feelings of your character through your body. You've got to exhale with your shoulders. You've got to really see this magical world that you're in. A lot of the video game worlds are fantastical, meaning you're on a spaceship, you're in another planet, you're underwater, and you have to, as an actor, be, I guess curiosity comes back around here. You have to be very curious about this world that doesn't exist in front of you, and you need to make it up. So there's a lot of make-believe. There's a lot of using all of your senses, full body experience, but also being very truthful to the character, even though some might be aliens, some might be, people. Finding the truth in the characters is always the goal, I think, of being an actor.
What is so captivating about movies? We revisit Nam Kiwanuka's conversation with film critics Tom Ernst and Alicia Fletcher, Toronto International Film Festival CEO Cameron Bailey, and filmmaker Clement Virgo on what makes movies magical.
One of my earliest childhood memories was my dad would take us to see the Back to the Future movies. So whenever a new one came out, we would all go. I have 6 siblings. And so when we would go, we would sneak in, homemade popcorn. But I remember it to this day, and it felt like the excitement of watching the new one and the time I spent with my family. At the time, I don't think I knew what that was, but it's become one of my core memories. And so I wanted to get from all of you, why do we love movies? Clement, I'll start with you.
Why do we love movies? I think we all love movies because we're trying to make sense of our lives, or our own lives. And I think movies, in some ways, tell us how to be, tell us how to live. And I think we love movies to kind of make sense of this thing that we're all going through.
You said something that's interesting. They tell us how to be. In what ways?
Well, I think movies do 2 things, a couple of things. I think some movies, Hollywood films, tell us what we imagine the fantasy of what life should be, and that's what we love. So the happy ending, we love the kiss at the end, we love the walk off into the sunset because
the good guy winning.
The good guy winning. So some, and they're like tell us how to be in the world. And then independent films, art films, tell us what life is really like, which is sometimes bittersweet, dark, ambiguous, while Hollywood films tell us it's going to be okay. This is a moral code of how to be in the world. The good guys always win, and you always get the girl.
Tom?
Well, it's a
Do you
tough
get
thing
the girl?
to follow.
Yeah.
To follow that. I have to agree on that. And I'm listening to Tell Us How to Be. It was very important to me when going to the film. And I think, though, that is why we need to, movies need to be more diverse and have more different voices, because if you're trying to identify, and you do identify with someone on the screen, which I did all the time, regardless, and I'm going to age myself, regardless whether it's Clint Eastwood, Burt Reynolds, whatever, I always found something that I could hone in on. And it's a fantasy, and it's a fantasy of a world that I would love to be in. And then that slowly transitions into a cinema that's more real and gives you a social conscience. It gives you a rationales for other ideas that are maybe more diverse than what you've seen in the Hollywood cinema. So, it's very simple to say that film is an escapism. But in fact, for me, growing up on a farm community, it was absolutely that. an escapism from the life that I was experiencing. There was some hardship in my childhood, of which this sort of removed me from. And gave me some excitement too.
I want to come to Alicia next, but you said something that I think was interesting. Social conscious?
Conscience. I mean, more aware of what was going on. I probably worded it incorrectly, but more aware of what was going on socially outside of my own world.
So it gave you, a view into a world that outside of your own.
Outside of my own, certainly outside of anything I recognize. And it was very close to what was, said in the opening about ideas and problems, and the world is not as clean.
Alicia?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up loving movies. Not every other kid around me did, and I think it was just, it taught me how to communicate, and I could see other people's lives in other worlds and other countries and places that didn't exist because they're fiction, whether that was science fiction or another genre, and made me feel like there was somewhere to go in life, and that things around me weren't necessarily going to be on one path, that I could choose what I wanted to do. And then growing up with classic movies, I was very lucky to not just have Hollywood movies, I had older Hollywood films in my life. My mother was movie obsessed. We watched Saturday night the movies on TVO all the time. I would throw temper tantrums if it was black and white. Didn't want to watch black and white, and now I'm like mortified by that. But it showed me this past life, this world that no longer existed, that wasn't always accurate and had a lot of problems with it, but it was like time traveling, and it just always stayed with me. And we talked about movies when I was a kid. My grandmother lived with us. She had Alzheimer's, and as her memory faded, all she could remember was kind of going to movies in the 30s, and she would tell me about these films that I didn't know what they were at 10 years old. I know what they are now, but when everything left her, she could still talk about that.
And I guess when you're watching them now, that's a memory that you hold on to.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
It's interesting about the black and white, but we'll talk about that in an upcoming episode. What about you, Cameron?
I think when we talk about why we watch movies, we're thinking mostly of one thing that movies do, because movies can do all kinds of things, but we're talking about stories, first of all. I think narrative movies, and that there is a real power there, but what I am always fascinated by is how movies are so different from other narrative forms. Very different from theater, from novels, from all different ways of telling stories. And I think that's because movies are so big, they're a giant screen in front of us, we're in the dark, we're smaller than the image we're watching, the sound is all around us now. And I think we are immersed in it, enveloped in it, and in a way you can only surrender to movies when they're that scale. It's very different than opening a little novel, right? And you're inside something smaller and your imagination expands, but the actual thing is small. And with movies, it's like you go to a kind of altar, and it's bigger than you. And in a way, that's why people worship movie stars, because they're just these giant icons.
Bigger
and I
than
think,
life.
Yeah, literally bigger than life. I think that's something fascinating. It's fascinating about movies, but also they concentrate experience, So the close-up in movies is something that's unique to that form. Television stole it afterwards, but theater didn't have close-ups. Novels don't have close-ups. Novels have other things that they do, but the close-up is another thing that concentrates a real-life experience and makes you feel like it's something that you can worship, that's bigger than you, that you have to surrender yourself to. And I think that's the enduring power of movies even now.
It makes me think of your latest brother, just the opening frames.
Yes.
They're in a field in Scarborough, the greatest place on the planet. Says me, I've been a Scarboroughian for like 2 minutes. But it's just like they're in a field, these power towers, I guess.
Yes.
And these two brothers are standing side by side. And I guess music too also creates that mood. Just to build on what Cameron was saying, how do you capture that moment and draw people in so they can surrender, like Cameron said?
Well, I think we've all sort of watched films, and opening of films are so crucial because they tell us how to watch them. They sort of lay the groundwork for the world that we're about to enter. In the case of Brother, it was really trying to create a sense of tone, mood, suspense, mystery. Why am I looking at this? Because I think the best films, I have a theory around the first 3 or 4 cuts of a film. You pretty much know what hands you're in within 3 or 4 cuts. And for me, those opening seconds are really, really important to create tone and mood. But just to sort of add on what Cameron said about movies, I mean, I think, we all kind of, in some ways, live in our own movie as we move through the world. And I think that movies and characters and stories make us see ourselves, which is, oh, I thought I was the only person that had those feelings, but here's this character in, I don't know, Breakfast Club or Gone with the Wind or whatever it may be. They have those same feelings, because we all think that our feelings are like unique to us, and movies remind us that no, you're not alone. Here's a story that's maybe not yours. Maybe it takes place in India or Africa or in LA, but it captures those feelings that we all have.
So then, would you consider then movies to be art or entertainment?
We're not choosing today. We are definitely allowed choosing. Come on now. Both, obviously, right? Yeah, I mean, they started as cheap entertainment for the masses. The very early movies were essentially peep shows, little peep shows, and then things that were meant to amaze you. They're kind of like TikTok, right? They were just spectacles. Nickelodeons were like tiny, short spectacles, like, wow, people can do that sort of thing. Somebody spraying somebody else with a hose, or just dancing, doing funny things.
Pornography.
Very early on. Right there at the very beginning of cinema. But then, of course, artists saw what this medium could do. And I think in the same way that any art form, whether it's different forms of music or dance or anything, when you put it in the hands of artists, it elevates it, it makes it deeper, it makes it more enduring in many cases. I mean, that's with great artists. There are artists who try and they just fail, but I think the tools of cinema can be put to the greatest artistic use, just like any other art form.
Tom?
Absolutely, and I think that entertainment is art in itself. But if I could digress just a little bit, because I'm remembering the very first film I saw, which is a film I probably should not have seen at the age of 4 or 5.
What was that?
M. Fritz Lang.
Oh,
Fritz Lang.
That's disturbing.
Child killer.
I know, the child killer. And I remember distinctly having this toy in my hand, and it was on television at the time. And my father was watching it, and they were speaking German. My dad knew German, and probably didn't think it never occurred to him, this isn't a film for a 4-year-old. So I'm asking questions, and I was really intrigued by Peter Lorre, who I didn't know was Peter Lorre. He was this man crying, and that got me. And then my dad explained what was going on in the picture, and I was just intrigued by it. So I don't know if I was entertained or fascinated, but
traumatized.
It probably was a bit of that, but I was, I was absolutely glued to the screen. And then years later, I have my own daughter. I'm watching Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, a little more of an appropriate film. She too has a toy in her hand, and she's standing there watching this movie, and she wanted to play, but she was transfixed by this little man caught in the cogwheels of this machine. And I just thought, it's her experience, I could relate it back to mine. And I would say Chaplin is art, and I would say it was also entertaining. So I think when it comes to art is cinema, art is cinema, entertainment, I don't really think there's necessarily needs to be a divide.
Alicia?
It can go from art to entertainment to art again to entertainment. Like there's a fashion that comes into play, and there's films that can be 80 or 90 years old, like you're talking about M. And for one period of time in one generation, it's art. The next, it's entertainment. It's in flux always. And you can find a film that was absolutely perhaps just capital A entertainment during a certain decade, and now it's capital A art. It really does kind of go back and forth based on how we are interpreting it. What's the context? There's films that are very ahead of their time that are misunderstood by their audiences, and then give it some time to breathe, it ferments, and it's all of a sudden something else. So I think trying to define whether it's one or the other is impossible, most likely.
Yeah.
I hope.
I take no greater pleasure than seeing a film that is being panned and thinking to myself, 10 years from now, we're going to love this movie.
Same.
When we talk about art and entertainment, can movies then be political?
every movie is political, of course. I mean, I think certainly if you study film, because it began as mass entertainment, it's shown to sometimes millions and millions of people. They're incredibly influential. It's an incredibly emotive medium, one of the most emotive art forms, in that it's hard to distance yourself because of all of those technical tools, being in the dark, the sound, the large image. So if you have something that reaches millions of people and is so persuasive and so emotive, by definition, it's got to be political because it's incredibly powerful. It can persuade people all kinds of things. You take like Westerns, for instance, the Western genre, and decades of all of us and our parents and our grandparents watching movies about a conflict between Europeans and indigenous people on the frontier of America. And that influenced how we thought about indigenous people and still does today. So the political impact is there built into the way movies work on us.
I remember watching Clint Eastwood movies with my dad, but I'm obviously, as an adult, I look at them differently. But back then it was so simple, the good guys and the bad guys.
That's right.
Yeah, and Clint Eastwood, you know, he did both Westerns and he did those, you know, Dirty Harry films, which were in some ways Westerns themselves. You know, he was the sheriff that's going to clean up, I think it was like San Francisco or whatever it is. And of course, you know, Cameron talked about the, you know, Native Americans in those films. In those early films by Clint Eastwood, you see how he would talk about in the sort of black and so-called criminal elements in San Francisco, and how during the 70s, when those films were made, how it affect how the larger culture and society view black people, because
there was a ripple effect in the communities.
Yes, because we all know, you know, go ahead, make my day, and we all know who he was saying that to, you know, and so, you know, cinema is definitely political, and you know, we've seen that throughout the 100+ years of cinema.
And you know, I think it's most political when it's not trying to be political.
I was going to say Top Gun.
Yes.
Maybe the most political movie made in the last few years.
Right. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Well, Cameron, please go ahead.
I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too, but I mean, immediately, first of all, it was made with the participation and the influence of the American military. And it's essentially a long ad for the thrill of being on the side of the American military and fighting the enemy on behalf of America. It's not explicit, but if you watch the film and begin to watch it even a second or third time, then you really see it. And that's not just the one from the 80s, that's the one from last year as well.
Last year, yeah.
You know, so the political impact is still there.
Even like a movie like Star Wars, right?
Oh, absolutely. Which is also a Western. So
And you know, and Star Wars is very, very classic, right? It's about this empire and these rebels. You know, and you know, and it's not ironic, and it's not coincidence that, you know, it was made during the Vietnam War, which was this kind of American cultural imperialism going over to Vietnam to try to, you know, control these rebels, and you know, it's about that. It's about World War II, obviously. You know, so you know. Cinema and governments and you know, have always used film to influence how people think about Japanese Americans, Native Americans, Black Americans, reaffirm notions around masculinity, you know, femininity, you know. So it's really, cinema in a way shaped us, like I said earlier, shaped us of how to behave in the world.
What about you, Tom?
Well, you know, I'm still kind of stuck on the Clint Eastwood aspect of that, because you're absolutely right. The Dirty Harry movies, which when I was a kid, we didn't miss. We rushed to see them. And Pauline Kael was a you know, very prominent critic at the time who opposed to these films. And we couldn't understand why. I read Pauline Kael, but the political aspect that she was pointing out was beyond my understanding. And I grew up in a small community, so the urban culture that Dirty Harry was sort of following through, it seemed like a great fantasy, you know, and spoofed beautifully in The Simpsons with McBain, you know, doesn't play by the book rules, right? You stupid chief. And that's it took me a long time to recognize just how off the mark these films can be. And if we're looking at these films as a way of identifying with how we should be, those movies that I loved as a kid, don't do the job.
Right.
You know, they skew it in a different way, very politically. And I thought Pauline Kael was, you know, losing her grip when she started to talk about politics and cinema. But, you know.
And those films from you know, the Death Wish films and the Dirty Harry films really kind of laid into and set the groundwork for Reagan in 1980. Because suddenly there's a sense of, you know, being tough on crime and sort of controlling the, sort of these urban environments. And so, you know, films definitely influence how the broader culture view certain communities.
Cameron, you brought up, you said that movies are political because they're emotive and they can create these emotions. I wanted to ask you all, you know, what questions are you trying to answer with your work? Clement, you said that you're trying to earn the viewer's emotion.
Right.
What did you mean by that?
Well, I know we've all watched films and you know, within the first minute or two, they're asking us to cry, and I'm like, I'm not ready to cry yet. You know what I mean? I'm just sitting there with my popcorn. I'm still, you know, because movies are kind of like, you're kind of, in a way, they're like romance. You know, you date a film, you go out on a date, and then it's like, okay, the first act, the date's good, and then it's like, maybe I'll go on a second date with you. You know what I mean? And so you slowly, as the movie develops, you're like, okay, I'll have a relationship with you. And then by the end of the movie, if you're lucky, then it's like, I'm in this with you. And,
I love that.
And I'm gonna feel emotions.
Now I'm getting worried.
And give us a list of movies that you feel this way about. I love it.
Well, but it's kind of like, you know, you want a film to slowly, in a way, seduce you and make you want to lean in and make you want to say, okay, you got me. I'm gonna be with you all the way to the end. And then for me as a filmmaker, you know, I'm trying to have those feelings earned so that if the film does affect you and it does earn your tears by the end, that's my hope.
What do you think? What do you think are the questions that films are trying to answer or explore? I know it's like a big question.
That's a giant question, and I guess it depends on the individual film, but also the kind of film that it's trying to be. So that could be the genre that it's working within, whether it's a commercial film meant to entertain people and bring in billions of dollars, or it's an independent film meant to express what the artist has deep in their heart. But I think they're all, first of all, they are, I hope, trying to keep the viewer engaged. And I gotta say, I see hundreds of movies every year, as probably most of us do here.
I think you will watch more than we do.
No, yeah, we watch a lot. Not enough movies, in my view, spend enough time thinking about the viewer. And I think sometimes movies kind of set themselves on a path where what they establish at the beginning in terms of the story they're trying to tell, the character they're trying to explore, takes them down a path that sometimes leaves viewers behind. And that doesn't mean that you have to be entertaining all the way along, but if you're not conscious of somebody watching the film and how that may be different than what you're creating, you're missing something. Movies only exist when they're being watched, right? And so that, I think, needs to be something that filmmakers always remember.
I think you can tell when a filmmaker thinks they're smarter than their audience, and that usually goes poorly most of the time. You can also tell when a filmmaker, like yourself, loves movies, when they're a cinephile themselves, when they understand the history, when they are with the audience, when they're making it. And I think that's where you get the best success, and that's where you get a film that, even if it doesn't land with audiences right away, it might be that phenomenon like you're talking about, Tom, or give it 10 years, give it 15 years, and it will be beloved.
Tom?
So tell me if this is a myth. I heard once that Rossellini said, if an audience likes my movie, I didn't do my job.
That sounds right.
Yeah, you know,
I don't know if it's true.
And I went, oh, thank God, because I haven't gotten really into anything Rossellini has made, or maybe I haven't given it its chance. But I find it curious, Cameron, when you say that the filmmakers don't often think about their audience.
Not often enough.
Often enough. Yeah. Okay. Maybe that's the clarification that's needed then, because I hear that, and I wonder if maybe by doing so, that I'm sure you didn't mean pandering to the audience,
No, not
but
at
that's kind of what I heard.
No, I think, so I spent many years as a film critic where I went to a movie and I watched it as me, the film critic, and I wrote my own particular reaction to it. Mm-hmm. And then I moved into programming films at the Toronto Film Festival, and I realized that is an entirely different job.
Big time.
Because it is not just what you think of the film. You have to imagine yourself among hundreds of other people watching a film, and an audience is a collective entity. It doesn't just have one reaction, but if a film's working well, something coalesces, some kind of shared experience of the film. I've seen it so many times. Last year at the festival with The Fabelmans and famously with movies like Slumdog Millionaire and others, where somehow the audience gets into the journey that the filmmaker is delivering for them. And that's kind of what I mean, that and it can be the most challenging film. It can be a film like Jeanne Dielman, the Chantal Ackerman film, where it may take a minute for everybody in the audience to kind of settle into the rhythm of that 3-hour film and what happens or doesn't happen in it. But at a certain point, people just start to lean forward and they're in the movie because the filmmaker has done that.
It made me think of like when you read a review of a movie and you're like, did we watch the same?
The answer is no.
Yeah.
Everybody watches their own movie.
Everybody watches their own film, and everyone, I would say that as a filmmaker, part of my process is to try to make a film that is personal to me. I think every filmmaker in some way think about the audience. Whether or not it's successful or whether or not it works or whether or not it resonates with you, that story resonates with you, I think that's a different thing. But I think if you spend the time and energy to try to say, I'm feeling about, this is how I'm feeling right now, and I'm gonna put it into a film. Stories historically I've always done that, from ancient Greek to the Bible. Stories are about trying to untangle this mystery of life, and sometimes those stories resonate and it makes sense, and sometimes it's like it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense for me. There's many films that I've seen that critics love. Films that people love. I'm like, I don't see it. I don't know what it is about Coda that people love.
Here's a look at something we're working on.
Americans have a great deal of self-doubt as to whether or not they are still exceptional. Secondly, it certainly isn't recognized as true anymore by other powers in the system. And of course, on a relative basis, it's moving in the direction where others are also seeing themselves as increasingly exceptional.
That's coming up on the agenda.